turn it back to the Eagles because it sounds, as we read in your book, they were these two guys, Don Henley and Glenn Fry, were very controlling. They just wanted to show the albums. Like this was what we don't care about, don't matter about the background, what happens, all that matters is the final result. Is that the way you kind of viewed the band?
No, not at all. I mean, I don't think they do either, or did either, to be honest. I think this is the great sort of Wizard of Oz image they projected, that we don't care, fuck you, classic kind of underdog inferiority complex behavior. They were so disregarded amongst their own peers in Los Angeles in the 70s, particularly as they got very successful very quickly, which almost all the others didn't. Like for a good example in the book is like David Crosby talking about how, the Eagles were just, to him, they were like the Partridge Family. To him, Crosby, Stills and Nash were like the Beatles, and the Byrds were like the Monkees, and I find that incredibly condescending. I mean, if Mickey Dolenz and Davy Jones had ever written One of These Nights, or Hotel California, or indeed, dozens of magnificent Eagles songs, I would come to their defense as well. I think Don and Glenn, they weren't from LA. They came in as outsiders. They were late to the party. The whole Laurel Canyon scene was very mature by that point. And I think they just got treated very badly and written off and dismissed, and just not given any love, any real kudos. And I think in a way that was a great spur for them to become what they quickly evolved into, which was, you cannot penetrate the inner circle. We trust no one. And so I relate to that. I mean, I completely relate to that. I think that's entirely valid. And I think they were totally misunderstood. And we have examples of that here in the UK, bands that were not discovered and nurtured by the elite music press, of which I used to be a member, so I know what I'm talking about here, that just made it. Black Sabbath, their first album went straight into the top 10 over here. They'd never had any press. It hardly played London. And consequently, they were treated like idiots, beneath me, not me, but the critics, but beneath us. Who cares? I think the Eagles had a lot of that, and it wasn't fair and it wasn't right. And I think they definitely ended up having the last laugh, except by then Don and Glenn were so coked out, they couldn't really laugh, kill them, it didn't matter anymore what people thought, so fuck them. I think that was the attitude.
So you think if they had arrived even just a few years earlier, they would have been more accepted in the Laurel Canyon scene?
Absolutely. I think if, Bernie Ledden, he had real pedigree. He'd been with Graham, but he hadn't made it. You have to remember the late 60s and the early 70s. I mean, that's when I first started buying albums and reading music press. And there was a really big issue in those days about, not selling out. We don't do this for the money. God forbid. We do this for the people. We do this to speak truth to power. And these are all good thoughts, but just completely unrealistic. And as I say, I think the Eagles just, they were seen as Johnny come latelys, and didn't we did better music than that, in the Byrds and all these other groups. but it's so grudging, you know, it's so grudging. New York can be like that, you know. New York can be very, very sniffy about who it accepts and who it gives a claim to, going back to the 70s. And I think for sure, if they'd arrived in 69, well, more or less did, but if they'd arrived at the same time as Graham Parsons wasn't selling records, and the same time as Gene Clark wasn't selling records, I think they'd have been right as rain. They'd have been cool, you know. They'd have been like all these other dudes at the Troubadour, getting by on well, everybody loves me here. No one knows who I am, but everybody says I'm cool.